Hello Varlets! Today we're going to take a look at a handful of tips and tricks that you can use to level up your Hive Scum gameplay. From seeing how far we can push our abilities to the limit, to optimizing our combat actions and build crafting, there's a thing or two here that everyone can probably take away. So stay to the end and learn them all. Now, let's get it on. One of the first things I really wanted to put together was a build that made use of the Blackout grenades as an offensive tool with Pocket Toxin, rather than a defensive one that happened to apply damage. To do this, I took the Bolt Pistol and built it around dealing with masses of flak enemies like Shotgunners and Maniac enemies like Ragers. For Blessings, I'm taking Lethal Proximity, which increases the Blackout Explosives radius by 25% from 3.5 meters to 4.4 meters. And since Blackout grenades can cause enemies to be staggered and knocked down, it was only natural that I took Execution as the other blessing to increase the Chem Toxin damage too. If you invest fully into Blackout grenades, taking all the talent nodes that can affect the Chem Toxin damage, you can actually deal a pretty substantial amount of damage in an instant to all enemies hit by your grenade. At least up until Auric, a single grenade can be made to clear a huge group of enemies and even bring down elites on its own. Even in Havoc, a single grenade can deal enough damage to clear hordes and soften up a bunch of enemies while creating space. A very strong offensive utility to have. Should push come to shove and you really need to wipe out a bunch of elites in front of you, throwing 2 Blackout grenades back to back on the densest group of enemies should do the trick most of the time. This combo of using the Bolt Pistol can be useful as part of a Rampage build since it does a pretty good job of sniping down far away enemies, which is one of the problems a Rampage build needs to solve. This next part is going to be a little number heavy, so brace yourself. The goal for this part is to find out what the perfect cooldown equilibrium of our stims would be so that we can have the lowest downtime for both Desperado and Rampage. I knew from just looking at the numbers that there was bound to be some ideal combination of talent, stim nodes, and cooldown curios that we could use to reach that point. To do that, first let's take a look at the cooldown branch of our stim lab. As you can see from this table, the cooldown branch is very underwhelming. Its effectiveness is really only useful if you invest into a tier 5 node. Otherwise, you're spending an awful lot of cooldown, 34 seconds to be precise, on your stim just to get back an extra 3.75 to 5 seconds at tier 4, which is very expensive for such little benefit. The main takeaway from looking at this table of numbers is that the highest cooldown you can ever recover with the stim across its duration of 20 seconds is going to be either 30 seconds through the Karma 5 upgrade, or 40 seconds with either the Clay or Hypex upgrade, depending if you can keep killing things throughout the duration of the stim. No matter which you choose, the cooldown of the stim will be 44 seconds at the very least. To figure out where all these numbers are going to fit into the equation, we're going to need to look at the ability cooldown table. First, we're going to split this table into two, one table for each abilities to keep things neat and tidy. This will make understanding the numbers simpler. Now, starting with Desperado, this table plugs in all the numbers to give you a clear and easy to understand comparison. The fastest you can get your Desperado cooldown back passively with a 20-second stim is in 25 seconds if you fully invest in your curios and the talent points into cooldown. If you take a more active approach with the Clay upgrade instead, you can actually get back your cooldown before or right after your stim runs out, depending on your investment. Otherwise, just having a cooldown regen on your curios will be enough to get your Desperado back in 20 seconds if you continue to kill things normally. What is clear to see here is that the longer lasting talent is really only giving value if you are taking the active approach with the Clay upgrade. If you are going through the Karma 5 upgrade, the extra 5 seconds of stim time basically translates into shaving an extra 2.5 seconds worth of cooldown, which I don't think is really worth it. For Rampage, the numbers are a lot easier to understand. If you want to passively get Rampage back up as soon as possible, the fastest you can do that is with 3 cooldown regen curios along with taking the longer lasting talent. This makes your Rampage have a cooldown of under 17 seconds. Now, that being said, Rampage's base cooldown is low enough that it actually provides you with more flexibility in how you want to improve its cooldown. If you are precious about talent points and don't want to invest in having a longer stim duration, then settling for a 19-second cooldown is also pretty good. But if you are taking a more active approach, you can get Rampage back within 15 seconds with the Hypex upgrade. In fact, as long as you can kill things during your stim duration, there's also almost no need for cooldown regen on your curios at all, since the difference is only 1.7 seconds. You also don't need to invest in longer lasting either with this method, making this option the most talent efficient if you can afford to kill, which you should be doing plenty of with a Rampage build. If you are confused about what to do, the Ogryn version of it on a table should help. Feel free to pause and analyze what the recommendations are. For now, let's move on to something a little less numbers heavy. The talent Sample Collector is probably one of the most useful talents available for the Hive Scum. Killing any enemy anyway allows you to restore 1% of your stim's cooldown per kill. If the enemy is infected with Chem Toxin, this is doubled to 2%. Now, conventional tactics would suggest to use the Needle Pistol or the Bone Saw to infect enemies to get your cooldown back faster. After all, the Needle Pistol can make short work of enemies, especially if they are grouped up, and the Bone Saw makes every kill count for 2% cooldown, making it very efficient for getting your stims back. However, if you don't want to use the Bone Saw as a melee weapon but do have a Needle Pistol equipped, then there's a small tactic you can use. If you are in the middle of fighting a group of enemies in melee, what you can do is whip out your Mark II Needle Pistol in blue mode and tag an enemy once. Nearby enemies might also be tagged too. Once you've tagged them, re-engage in melee and prioritize killing the tagged enemy. If you kill them before the Chem Toxin debuff wears off, you'll cause them to explode and infect nearby enemies too, causing them to be infected and making them worth 2% cooldown instead of 1%. Doing this can often mean getting back 10% of your stim's cooldown instead of 5%, artificially doubling the number of enemies you would have killed otherwise. This allows you to optimize getting your stim cooldown back by making even small melee engagements an effective moment to farm back your stim, and over time really adds up to reducing its downtime throughout your mission. And because enemies are only infected with a single tick of Chem Toxin, the odds of them dying to it are extremely low, which makes farming for your Blackout Grenades back much easier too. It does take some time to make it a habit though, so practice whipping out your Needle Pistol in between melee strikes. The last tip is about leveraging the Regained Posture talent, which restores 10% stamina on dodge. On the surface, it seems like a pretty ordinary node, which is nice for recovering a bit of stamina while in combat and dodging, especially if you are pushing and blocking. But what this talent doesn't tell you is that it counts the number of attack instances dodged individually. This means you can trigger the 10% stamina regen multiple times in a single dodge, depending on how many attacks you dodged in one go. What's even better is that there is no cooldown to this ability. It will keep restoring stamina as long as you are dodging attacks, melee or ranged. This also makes the Slippery Customer talent, where you gain melee immunity while sliding, very useful since you are considered in a dodge state while sliding. Functionally speaking, if you have enough max stamina, you can technically block forever while weaving in dodges to get a burst of stamina back. Given all the benefits this node provides, it pairs best with Rampage, allowing you to recover some of the stamina you would have lost after Rampage ended. It works pretty well since it restores a flat percentage and isn't affected by the stamina regen penalty of the ability. There you have it, 4 quick tips and tricks to hopefully give your Hive Scum gameplay a little more oomph. This was originally going to be a much longer guide with more tips and tricks jammed in. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I should just include the essentially useful stuff here. Perhaps if I collect enough talking points again, I might make a part 2 guide to follow up on this one, so if you have any mechanics or tips and tricks you'd like to share, feel free to post in the comment section. If I come across one which is new to me, and I do make another video, I'll be sure to mention you in it. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you, as always, in the next one. Varlets.